2019 Ozone summary presented by Dr. Fine.
Good morning, Dr. Burke. One of our program supervisors in our air quality analysis group, Scott Epstein, is going to make the presentation today.
Okay.
Good morning.
Excuse me, before you get started, can you take the slides down from my camera? Yeah, great, because I have them right here. Now, can you guys see them?
No. No.
No, you can't see them? Okay, put them back up, block me out.
Okay. I haven't memorized them yet, so I need to see them as well. So good morning. So I have what I think is a pretty interesting presentation, looking at kind of where we are with ozone and kind of where we've come. And I'm going to give the abbreviated version, so I'll skip a few slides, knowing that there's more interest for the second presentation. So as we all know. Oh, okay. So as we all know, South Coast Air Basin has the worst ozone in the country. And first I'm going to talk a bit about the factors that govern, or why we have the worst ozone in the country. And then go into the federal standards that we have to attain, where ozone is worse in the basin, and then look at trends in ozone and what the kind of the 2019 values were, and then also talk a bit about all the factors that influence year-to-year changes in ozone. Okay, so we all know that ozone is a secondary pollutant and is formed in the atmosphere. It's not emitted directly. And the key ingredients to forming ozone in the atmosphere are NOAQS and VOC emissions. You also need sunlight, right? And we know that sunlight varies based on time of the year, so ozone is very seasonal. Okay. Ozone is very seasonal. Also, temperature is very important for ozone. So higher temperatures increase the rate of reaction forming ozone, and they also increase VOC evaporation, so it governs the emissions. And then another key factor is atmospheric mixing and ventilation. So we have very ideal weather conditions for ozone. So we have high temperatures, and then we also, in the summer, have a lot of high pressure systems that have very stable, warm air masses. It traps the emissions close to the ground, traps the ozone close to the ground, and then we have a basin that's framed by mountains, which keeps the ozone in our basin. Okay, so this is a sort of a complex slide, but 30,000 foot level is that there are two forms of the ozone standard, the 8-hour standard and the 1-hour standard. We need to attain both of them. And then the 8-hour standard, there's actually 3 versions of different that were issued different years of different stringency, anywhere from the 80 ppb standard to the 70 ppb standard, and we have different years that we need to attain those standards. And then the next 2 slides talk a bit more about how that's calculated, but we'll just skip through that. But it's still in your slide handout. Okay, so where is ozone worse in our jurisdiction? So this map shows the 3 basins: South Coast Air Basin, the Salton Sea Air Basin, which is known as the Coachella Valley, and the Mojave Desert Air Basin. You can see in the South Coast Air Basin, the most exceedances are recorded in San Bernardino County, Inland Empire area. And that's not necessarily because they have the most emissions. So what happens is the prevailing winds in the summer come from the coast. They push the air inland. It takes time for ozone to react. So that air is entraining all the emissions in the urbanized area. NOAQS and VOC are reacting, and it isn't until it gets inland to San Bernardino County area that you get these sort of peak ozone levels. Okay, so there's a bunch of ways we can look at trends. So one method is looking at kind of a crude trend, which is the number of exceedance days in the basin. So there's 2 colors here. So first is the green color, which is the number of exceedances of the 1-hour standard, and then the blue color are the number of exceedances of the 8-hour standard. You can see we've had pretty sharp declines in the number of exceedance days by about a factor of 2 since the 80s. However, there's been sort of a stabilization of the number of exceedances. However,
Excuse me, could you go back to the last slide?
Sure.
So what geographically or physically causes that one spot?
So this is done with the monitoring data. So if we don't have a
Yeah,
monitor
but
there, we
I
don't
believe it's
know.
there,
Yeah.
but what causes it?
Transport mountains.
Yeah. So, yeah, right. So the higher elevation, so the highest one you see up there is crestline. So the higher elevation actually contributes to higher concentrations. And then also the without getting into too complex, but the NOx emissions can actually in areas where you have a lot of NOx emissions, that can actually reduce ozone in the short term. And those areas over there have less NOx, so you can get higher ozone in those areas.
Less NOx being NO2 or NO?
NO2 plus NO. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, Larry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
Go ahead.
my understanding is that NO is something that's good for getting rid of ozone.
It's not necessarily good. When it's at high concentrations in the immediate vicinity, it can destroy ozone.
Right.
But as it continues to react, you end up making more ozone.
More NO2 and then more ozone. So it doesn't stay NO very long in a high ozone environment.
So it rapidly interconverts between. So and that's one of the reasons why we usually just call it NOx, because they flip back and forth. You group them together.
But is this higher concentration of ozone in this area due to less NO being produced?
I think it's a combination of factors, right? So this is where the transport takes the air mass inland and it does get trapped. It is after there's been enough time to react. There's a lot of sunlight out there as opposed to the coast, which sometimes doesn't have the sunlight. And there's a little bit of an effect where there's very high localized, combustion emissions, you get a little bit of a suppression. But I think most of it is this is just where the air mass ends up and where it stagnates. So if we don't have the mountains, we don't have the mountains or topography here, but if you looked at it, that area is basically the eastern part of the basin, the eastern part of the bowl.
What have we done to specifically deal with that spot?
Now, the best thing we can do to reduce ozone is reduce emissions.
No, not the best thing. What have we done?
We are working to reduce NOx emissions basin-wide. It's the only way to reduce ozone.
You got a totally blue map, and you got a spot that looks like a bullseye.
But the bullseye is caused
So
by
what
emissions.
do you do in the bullseye?
Well, the bullseye is caused by emissions in the blue parts of the map.
There's no way to concentrate and mitigate that area in an increased manner. So it's not such a bullseye, to borrow from Dr. Burke's.
There's no giant vacuum, there's no giant ionizer. It's just reducing the amount of pollutant that goes to the area. That's the strategy. So we reduce it, we get rid of that bullet point, and we try to get it uniform across the board.
And this is not just conjecture. We have complicated computer models who model all this, validate.
Would you stop holding the signs up? It's distracting. I can't see them anyway. They're just like little dots from far away. Okay, I'm sorry, Phil, go ahead.
I'm just saying, this isn't just conjecture. We have computer models that run every hour of every year that model this whole situation. They get validated against measurements, and they all predict the same thing, that to reduce these ozone levels, you need NOx reductions basin-wide.
Has that spot been moving to the west?
Mr. Nastri, I notice you've been very quiet during this discussion. you've let Phil Fine stand up there and take the bullet. But, so, have you got an alternative plan here or some kind of suggestion so that that we can deal with this problem?
So Dr.
Or
Burke,
should I just go have another cup of coffee?
coffee always helps in the morning, I find. But in this particular case, the solution is very straightforward. It's reduce the NOx. You know, as I said, we're not gonna have a giant vacuum at that point. We're not gonna have these giant ionizers at some point. We're not gonna be doing a lot of things to that. We've got to reduce the amount of NOx that gets there. And that's why the strategy has been to reduce NOx. I know there's a discussion about VOC impact and how that affects the photochemical reactions and the ozone formation. But we've got a lot of PhD experts, a lot of scientists around the world that have looked at the strategy. And strategies that have been proven, that have been working, that you see, and you will see in additional slides, our ozone concentrations are going down, but we still have other factors that are affecting it. And that's what Dr. Epstein will be talking about. But the bottom line is we have to reduce NOx. We've got to reduce the amount that's being trapped by the mountains. They're coming up and getting into the elevated areas.
Is there any longitudinal evidence that there's been an improvement in the Inland Empire region based on the current scope of NOx mitigation measures that are currently underway? Are we trending
Yeah, well, the previous slide showed
toward
some of
blue?
the,
Are we trending
Yes.
toward blue?
Yes.
yeah, the previous slide, the next slide actually, because we went back, does show that trend going down. And it's been a NOx reduction strategy and a VOC reduction strategy for many, many years. But what we find now, the models tell us, is that the NOx reduction strategy is much more effective.
And in the modeling, would there be a projection over the next decade that would look at the area in question turning blue? If we did what we're doing now, for
Well,
the
that's
next
what-
10 years, would we be
That's
seeing
what the-
a
We would reach
blue
attainment.
area?
That's what the
Yes.
air quality management plan is about. It uses these models and it projects, takes emission reductions and projects what that's going to do to that bullseye. And the idea is to get that down into the green and blue. That's the whole point of the air quality
And
management.
how
plan.
long would we project it would take to get to blue based on what we're doing now and the current modeling that's been done?
Well, let me interject because there's so many different variations.
It's a projection, I know. I'm just trying to get a sense of 50 years, 10 years.
Well, if we don't do anything else, it's not going to change.
Yeah.
It's what we need to do to get there, which is another 45 or 55% reduction in NOx emissions. And how we get that is the subject of the air quality management plan and all the things we talk about.
So we know what we need to do to get there. It's a question of how do you get there? And that's why you'll hear a lot of discussions about incentive funding, right? Because when we look at the incentive funding to deploy advanced technology, all we're doing is reducing NOx. We're going from diesel trucks to zero emission trucks. We're reducing NOx. We're going from sources that have combustion that are generating NOx to zero emission sources. That's the strategy to deal with the ozone problem. It's the strategy to deal with climate change. And so the question then becomes, well, what's the cost to implement those programs? And you'll hear a lot of different ideas, a lot of different theories, a lot of different approaches. You've heard about the voter district authorization bill. The AQMD basically specifies we need 1.5 billion a year for the next 15 years so that we can actually deploy the technology that reduces the NOx, that gets us to where we need to be. And we always look at it in terms of the federal attainment deadlines. And then what we have to look at is, can we get the resources to get there by 2023, by 2031, by 2037? And we can actually model, and I think what would be most effective is if we actually bring back to the committee modeling that shows over time, so we can actually see the variation and what happens with the different runs in terms of the level to which we're able to deploy some of those technologies. But the end goal is to meet the attainment by the attainment dates.
What's the natural ozone background?
45, 40 to 45, depending on the time of year.
40 to 45 what?
Parts per billion.
weather has a lot to do with this, right?
Absolutely. And Scott will get into that in a moment.
And how is weather taken care of in the model?
That's a good question. The way that EPA guidance says that we have to run these models for attainment demonstrations is you essentially hold weather constant. You take weather in the base year that you're modeling, and then you project into the future the same weather. Now, we've made comments that they need to provide guidance of how to deal with potential future weather changes due to climate change. We have a study that's looking at that. We need to have a procedure for doing that. We have looked at that kind of as an aside in our air quality management planning, because EPA, that's not how they currently would allow you to do attainment planning. But we think coming up in the next plan and subsequent plans, and as EPA modeling guidance gets updated, this is something that's going to have to be taken into account.
Mayor McKellen, the board approved that study that was looking at climate change impacts versus weather change. I think that's going to have a potentially...
Not climate change impacts, looking at meteorological impacts.
Well, looking at
You know,
both, right?
because you've got the eastern Pacific High sitting out there that oscillates back and forth.
Yes.
What's the effect of that on the numbers that we see?
Well, one thing we do is we don't take one single year of data. We look at a 5-year window. So that tends to smooth out some of the shorter term, year-to-year weather variations. The concern is that if the longer term trends are leading to some longer term weather changes, that's not currently accounted for in the models. So the way the guidance works is it's like about a 5-year window, weighted window, that if one year was high and the next year was low, it kind of gets averaged out in the modeling.
But the point that I wanted to make was that I think this gets to some of the issues that you're raising in terms of how US EPA looks at it, how some of the models are used. And so we're just trying to get a better understanding of these things so that as we move forward, we're trying to deal with the correct issues as we hit those attainment dates. So hopefully that'll be done, I believe, later this year. It's also within the presentation, so I'm going to be quiet and maybe turn it back over to Dr. Epstein.
Okay, so I spoke about how looking at total exceedances is a bit of a crude metric because it's binary. It's either you exceed or you don't. Recording 71 or 69, 71's an exceedance, 69's not, even though the concentrations are about the same. So a better way to look at this is to look at actual concentrations that are relevant for the standard. So this plot has 2 colors. So first I want to draw your attention to red. So red is the second highest 1-hour ozone value. So this is relevant for the ozone standard. And we put the ozone standard on the plot on that dashed horizontal line. And you can see 1-hour values, much like the 8-hour values, have decreased significantly since the 80s by about a factor of 2.5. And we're sort of approaching the 1-hour standard. However, there's been kind of a stabilization over the past decade or so. We see very similar behavior with the 8-hour ozone values, and we had this decline of about 2.5 times, and then sort of a stabilization, with the difference that we're much farther from attaining the 8-hour ozone standards than we are from attaining the 1-hour ozone standards.
But
So
if we're tracking the NO2 emissions, are tracking, why, and they're going down, why is this 8-hour ozone level not only declining by a small percentage compared to the NO2 reduction?
So I have about 7 slides to answer your question. Is it okay if we wait till we get to those slides?
Well,
The slides will answer your question. Yeah.
well, I'm not sure they do, but
We'll try the best we can. Yeah. Okay, so another way of looking at this is we can look at every individual day, which seems a little overwhelming but very colorful. But first I want to just talk about what the air quality index is. So this is a way that we communicate to the public the precautions that they should take to minimize exposure on high pollutant days. It goes from good in the green category up into hazardous in this sort of deep maroon. Orange and above are considered exceedance days. So this plot shows actually every single day between 2005 and 2019. There's 366 bars across. And some notable things is that the ozone season is mainly concentrated from May till October. That's where you see the most reds. And if you notice, everybody remembers this season, May was pretty cool and dreary, and we got a late start to the ozone season because of that. So the ozone season really didn't kick off this year till about June. Another thing to note from this is that the deep purples, the very unhealthy category, there used to be many more of them in the mid-2000s than there are currently. We can put this on a bar plot that looks at the total amount of exceedances per year. So essentially you sum up across each of the rows, showing that total exceedances, which is the height of the bar, has been relatively flat. However, with the exception of 2017, we do have fewer of the very unhealthy days. So everything I showed so far was the South Coast Air Basin. Now just switching gears to the Coachella Valley. And things look a little bit peachier in the Coachella Valley. So we've had a pretty steady decline in 8-hour ozone exceedance days. We haven't had a 1-hour ozone exceedance day since about 2007. So that's good news. And then if we look at concentration, so first let's talk about the 1-hour concentration trend. So we're well below the 1-hour standard in the Coachella Valley. The 8-hour ozone standard, we do not yet attain the 80 ppb standard, which is shown as the upper blue dashed line. However, 2019 was the first year that our fourth highest concentration was below the 8-hour standard. So we're in pretty good shape in the Coachella Valley for attaining that 80 ppb standard. If next year or this year and the following year are about the same or better than 2019, we should be able to attain that 8-hour standard. Okay, so the obvious question is, why is ozone progress slowing, and why has it been flat over the past decade? That's a very obvious question, but unfortunately it's a very complex answer. And the reason why it's complex is that I'll show you evidence on the next couple slides that our man-made emissions have declined and will continue to decline. However, there's some uncertainties about what's happened with natural emissions from wildfires and or vegetation. So VOCs from vegetation are an important source, about 30% of the VOCs in the basin, and then changes in chemistry and changes in weather and climate. Okay, so this is a plot showing NOx, VOC, and CO emissions from our emission inventory. So this is modeled emissions in the basin from 2000 to 2020. And our emission inventory, which is an accounting of all our emissions, indicates a pretty sharp decline in these precursor emissions, NOx and VOC. And also, we expect that those emissions will continue to decline. And we can verify this with monitoring data. So we can't monitor all the emissions in the basin. However, we can monitor concentrations throughout the basin. So basically, if you take all the monitors in the basin and average their NO2 concentrations throughout the year, you get a plot just like this. So we do see that NO2 has decreased significantly from 95 and in recent years. So that leads to the effect of what's happened with natural emissions. So this is a plot showing the forest acres burned in the West as a function in year. And we've all seen, that there have been more fires in recent years, so there's been a lot more acreage burned, and fires are a strong source of NOx and especially VOCs. Okay, so now the complexity of ozone chemistry does play a role. So this slide is extremely complicated, and it's actually a very gross oversimplification of the ozone chemistry and the reactions that govern ozone chemistry. But really the take home from this slide is that we talked about how ozone is dependent on temperature and sunlight and NOx emissions and VOC emissions, but it's also dependent on the ratio of NOx and VOC emissions. And that ratio changes as we reduce NOx faster than we reduce VOCs. But the important thing in this is that while this mechanism is very complicated and there's a whole bunch of reactions that govern ozone chemistry, our models do a pretty good job of capturing all these reactions and modeling the chemistry of ozone. Okay, so there's also some
How do you
uncertainty.
know
Because the models, you can compare the models to the actual measured concentration. So you can simulate a year, like our base year, that we have actual concentrations. And the models do a pretty good job of reproducing what we actually measured. So there's also uncertainty around the effects of climate and weather, not only what's happened in the past, but what's going to happen in the future. And we know that temperatures have gone up in our area over the past several decades, and warm weather not only increases VOC emissions, but also speeds up the reaction of ozone. And then it's not only temperature, but it's also changes in meteorology. So ventilation of the basin or stagnation can have large impacts in these year-to-year changes or future changes in ozone. Okay, we're not the only area that has seen this sort of stagnation, or actually some areas have seen increases in ozone in recent years. So this plot shows 4 areas of the West. If you draw your attention to the left side, so that's these are all the design values of all the stations in the Northwest region of the country. And then the bottom left are all the design values for all the stations in the west part of the country. And you see we're not alone. There's been kind of a flatlining, or actually increases in some areas. So we're working really hard to try and understand the complexity of this situation. So we funded a study to look at this, not only what it means for current ozone concentrations, but also what it'll mean for future ozone concentrations. And fortunately, our study is not the only study looking at this. This is a pretty hot topic in the academic community, and there's a lot of other groups interested in this very subject. Okay, so just to wrap things up, we've seen over the long term a pretty impressive downward trend in ozone. However, there's been sort of a stabilization in the past decade or so. Our concentrations this year were similar to the concentrations reported last year. There's a really bright note in the Coachella Valley that this was the first year that our 8-hour, 4th highest concentration was below the standard, setting us up for a good position for the next couple of years. And then also just zooming out a bit, we need to be a little bit careful not to overinterpret these short-term fluctuations. So the signal's really noisy. When you look at the ozone concentration trend, it's a very noisy trend, and it's very hard. We don't want to overinterpret slight fluctuations in that trend. However, we're continually assessing that. And hopefully, the study that we're funding and work in the academic community can help elucidate some of these complex dependencies on ozone.
Well, hopefully, looking at the meteorological factors, we will have people doing that who are not biased, and that they're really looking at the facts instead of saying, all right, it's global warming, here's what the answer has to be. We have a lot of, in the academic world, that's their bent. And hopefully people who are doing this meteorological study are unbiased and looking at the real effects, either plus or minus compared to global warming.
So this study is specifically not a climate study. It is a meteorological study. What are the factors in meteorology that are leading to this, and short-term and past trends in meteorology? It's a component of it that to look at what the climate models predict and then put that, what would that mean? But it's not making climate predictions.
So my personal opinion, I think sunspots have a lot to do with, sun activity has a lot to do with what's happening in the climate right now. And that we're entering a quiet period of sunspot activity, and we're going to have a gradual cooling. And it's already started over the next 12, 15 years.
Here's what bothers me about this whole thing. You know, I have limited intellect, so I have to look at things in the most simple manner that I possibly can. So on every chart that you showed, there's been a downward progression, which indicates improvement in the district over the last 25 years, right?
Yep.
So when do we ever get to where we need to be? Because, you know, I've been here for those 25 years. I guarantee I will not be here for the next 25. So I just want to know when I can get off this train.
The nice thing about being a lowly program supervisor is that I can defer questions like that to my bosses. That's the best part about this job.
I'm very familiar with your boss, you know, so I know he's not going to answer it with any kind of answer that I can deal with. But
2037, Dr.
it
Burke.
just, huh?
2037.
We'll get there.
Well,
That's 17 years? I
yeah.
won't be around. So anyway, it just, I'm very proud of the fact that this district has moved in the direction that all those charts are improving, every single one of them. I mean, not fast enough, not enough. I understand all that. But it's going in the right direction. The question is how we can keep it going that way and not make everybody move out of the district, and how we can get to the goals which are mandated by EPA. So that I think that's what we're looking for here.
And Dr. Burke,
So,
when I said 2037, you know, I was looking at a future standard that's going to be at 70 ppb, not the 75 that we're shooting for in 2031, not for the other standards that we're shooting for in 2023. I mean, our mission is to reach those standards, and we know how to do it. It's just a question of having the resources to get there. So we're going to do everything we can
well,
to get there.
you know, here's what some people would say to you, Wayne.
All right.
If you have improved this dramatically without those resources, what makes you say that you need them now?
You know, it's a lot easier at the very beginning to get the emission reductions. You can make relatively modest investments and get fairly large reductions. But as time goes on, the cost for those incremental emission gains becomes much more expensive. And that's why oftentimes we look at different types of applications where we know for the same amount of money, we're going to get a much larger emission reduction than we would otherwise. So for instance, the ships, ocean-going vessels, we know that for a relatively modest investment, we can get a very large NOx reduction. But once those emission controls are in place and we need to get additional reductions, it becomes much more expensive and much more difficult. So when you look at the curve shows a rapid decline in those emission reductions, which is what we would expect. But you do expect that curve in terms of the rate to lessen as we get closer toward that goal. Look at our automobiles, our light-duty vehicles. When you look at the amount of how clean those vehicles are, and you look at the incremental changes that are necessary, it's a lot more difficult to get those changes now than it used to be back in the 70s. So we understand the cost aspect, we understand the difficulty in moving forward, and you'll hear a lot of people say, well, maybe we should look at it from a global perspective and reduce emissions elsewhere because we have transport coming into our region. But we've got to deal with our region, we've got to deal with the locality, we've got to deal with the conditions that we're given. So those are the causes, those are the challenges that we see moving forward, and that's why resources now are more and more important.
Well, if you were paying for it out of your pocket, which you are out of all of our pockets,
That's right.
you'd probably say to yourself, you know, if I'm improving at the dramatic rate that I still am, I'm going to wait till it slows down before I invest enormous amounts of money. Now, I'm supporting, that's the district calling. I'm supporting your sales tax initiative, and and I'm supporting it with some vigor.
Excuse me.
But it's, you know, if you do go forward with that, if we are successful in that, you have to look at the amount of money that you're spending and think that a lot of people are going to want to know, that's not the district, are going to want to know how efficiently are we using that money.
Yes.
And I know that we think, we know that we're going to use it in an efficient manner, but you got to be able to explain that, you know. My great example of that to my child who sits in the legislature is, the legislature has a rainy day fund. The legislature never called me and asked me if I had a rainy day fund. They just took my money and put it in their rainy day fund. I don't understand that. So I don't want to get in that same position and have to defend AQMD from taking money that would not be adequately justified in the expenditure. That's it.
Understood. Thank you.
Did that conclude your remarks on that item?
Yes.
Okay, then we will move on to,
Dr. Burke?
yes.
We have public comment?
We have public comment on that item?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We have several.
Ms. Mitchell?
Yeah, looks like we have 5 people that want to speak on this. How much time would you allow them?
You're on mute. We can't hear you, Dr. Burke. You're on mute.
Yeah, unmute.
Would Ms. Mitchell please call the names for me?
All right. The first one is Angela Guzman.
How much time, Dr. Burke? We have about 5 speakers.
We'll give everybody the regular 3 minutes.
That is not the microphone, it's the
It's just
thing that looks like the candy bar on top. You're good.
Just speak normally. All right. I was like,
Speak into the candy bar, that's a new one.
okay. Hello, members of the board. I'm Angela Guzman. It does not shock me how concentrated and harmful this ozone layer is impacting the IE. I've grown up here suffering from the poor air quality, and I am seeing my nephew and his friends also suffer from the poor air quality. I'm tired of hearing the people in power to make the change tell me that it's not as bad as before, but it's still bad. And it's getting worse from climate change conditions, and I think it's obvious through the presentation. I'm doing everything in my power to eliminate my university's commitment to fossil fuels by leading a divestment and reinvestment campaign. So I kind of expect you to, the AQMD, to also be doing everything in your power to make those changes to clean the air in our area. So thank you.
Thank you.
Did you, ma'am, did you just see the charts?
Yeah, I did.
Did you just see the charts in the presentation?
I did.
Were you unsatisfied with the progress?
No,
They're still bad, Dr. Bird.
It's half the year that we can't even breathe, like clean air. Half the year. I just don't think that's a truth for other places in the world. I mean, like in the US. So I know I'm not satisfied, and I don't think I'm happy for my nieces and nephews to grow up with this reality. They're literally.
So what would you suggest we do?
I think you have to switch to zero carbon vehicles, do everything in your power to fix this. I think there has to be more regulation, more of everything really to make that switch. You have to make that switch.
Okay, thank you.
The next one is
Next.
Barbie Osnaya. Did I say it right? Osnaya. Sierra Club.
Hello, good morning. So yes, thank you for the work that you're doing, because you are doing this good work. I come from Colton, that's right here in the middle, this little bullseye. So looking at this just makes me seem very segregated, makes me feel very like, you said it, there's a bullseye. So as somebody who's living in the area that's most affected, I come asking to, keep pushing, to set the rules, set the regulations, so that we have clean air. I live in, once again, Colton, where we're just my area. I'm between railroad, cement factory, recycling and waste management center. So like literally east, south, west, north, there's something that's a contributing polluter. So I ask, as a member, as somebody who has suffered from issues because of the air, with elder parents, with nephews and nieces who sometimes can't go out because the air is too unhealthy, I ask to please start investing in zero emissions, pushing hard for that. I wrote a little note here for myself to make sure we are making the big guys pay, that we are holding people accountable as much as we like to hold the public and the individuals accountable, that we hold the big guys accountable, because we can only do so much on the micro level. It's making those on a macro level, and have the money and have the access and have been capitalizing off of this pollution for them to start paying it back. Thank you.
Thank you. Angie Balderas.
Hello, good evening, board. Good morning. Please excuse me, I've been sick. And being sick and breathing the dirtiest air, specifically like IE, I live in the borderline of Highland and San Bernardino. And this being sick has really triggered a lot of respiratory issues for me. And not a funny story, but when this becomes to be a norm, like just going to a doctor visit to Kaiser, and the nurse just, and I questioned them, I was like, why are you guys always giving me an inhaler? She's like, well, we've been coming to a lot of cases where folks are getting sick, and it, triggers a lot of their respiratory issues. She's like, it's normal around here, especially when it gets hotter. Now, that's pretty effed up when shit starts to become normal. And this is what we have to deal with in the inland region. And where I live, I'm surrounded by airports, I'm surrounded by all these different polluters, warehouses, train tracks, and so forth. So we cannot continue the trend of business as usual. We'll not achieve our air quality goals and federal air attainment deadline. This is why it's so crucial to invest in zero emissions. And we need to give our community a fair chance to healthy communities, healthy way of living. Folks are dying every day. Now, if this doesn't, give you that desire, that ganas to want to put strong regulations on polluters, that that people are dying, then I don't know. It's like falling on deaf ears. Folks are dying every day of respiratory issues, cancer due to our air quality. In our communities, our folks simply can't afford it at all levels. Just myself, I'm privileged to have insurance and even be able to go to the doctor. And we brought a few treats for y'all, and I hope you enjoy. These are chocolates that are shaped as lungs, and I hope you enjoy them. But I hope they remind you that in our region, especially, people are sacrificing their lungs, not willingly, for people's profits, and it's up to you to please protect us. So let me know when y'all decide to really push, and I hope soon, because this is urgent. Thank you.
Carlo De La Cruz.
So, good morning. Happy February, members of the Mobile Source Committee, Chair Burke. Want to thank you for listening attentively to our community members. So, this is a part of an effort, really, because we wanted to take the opportunity for February to show you that air quality doesn't have to be all us standing up here telling you about how our communities are suffering from air quality. It could also be about working towards a brighter future. So today, in that spirit, we wanted to deliver not only chocolate lungs to you all, because you all have a special place in our lungs, but we wanted to deliver over 658 digital postcards, Valentine's Day cards, Clean Air Valentines from members from across the region. These are members in your district. These are members from your community who are sending you messages of not only love, but of also of what a good job you are doing right now in terms of some of the things you're doing to reduce our emissions. Many messages in here are really heartfelt. I really want to encourage you to read them because many of them say, thank you for letting us know when the air quality is bad so we don't have to send our children outside to play. Many of them say, thank you for letting us know when it's unsafe for me to go outside so that way I know today I have to take all my phone calls and my meetings from my house and I have to keep my air purifier on. These are real messages from real constituents and real voters. So today I have a copy of Chair Burke, we have a copy for you as well. But because it's so good to see everyone here in person, I have a copy for each of the 4 board members of part of the Mobile Source Committee. So just want to hand them over. Thank you. And Chair Burke, we're here a lot. I'm sure I'm familiar. My name is Carlo Dela Cruz. I'm with the Sierra Club. When I started this work, my hair was much, much darker. And in some ways,
black.
That's right. Yes, at least Chris is right. But what do we want? We're willing to sit in many hours of meetings, and we already have. But really, what we want to be able to see is a transition away from the fossil fuels that are polluting the communities, from Long Beach to Aliso Canyon to South LA to East LA to Compton to Jurupa Valley to the Moreno Valley to the East Coachella Valley to the San Fernando Valley to all the communities suffering from poor air quality in South Coast. I really commend the staff for the hard work for the presentation they presented. There are slides in there that were so good that I literally laminated them and I'm going to put them up on my wall because it's a constant reminder of what we're fighting against. This is not a 1-year battle. This is not a 10-year battle. This is a decade-long battle because the South Coast AQMD has a history of being innovative and being the first district in the world to really be able to find solutions for reducing our air quality. I have 15 seconds left, so I just want to say, Chair Burke, we have lots of ideas. Being able to regulate household combustion, being able to move towards zero emission, be able to move towards regulation at freight facilities. But we really want to encourage you, take the rules and regulations that you have on your calendar this year seriously. We're going to hear an update about the ports. That was another opportunity that we can really see real emission reductions. We have a warehouse rule coming up this year. That's another opportunity. So I want to thank you again for listening for us, and we'll be back.
Thank you for your testimony.
One more speaker, Alicia Ancisco. Did I say it right?
Good morning, Honorable Chair
Can you stand
Burke.
behind the podium, please, to Michael? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm so small, I'm going
Thank
to
you.
see me. And committee, I had the pleasure of sitting on the EJAC Environmental Justice Committee for many years. And I moved back from Los Angeles a few years ago because my mother is now 95. But it's very interesting to see that a lot of her peers are no longer with us and that they died very early from cancer, respiratory problems, etc. The last few days, we've had a couple of events over the Little Mountain homes, and I saw a cap that reminded me of something. When I was going to UCLA, I'd come home on the weekends, and once I drove over Pomona, I would see Cal Poly, I would see this layer of guck. It was a thick layer of pollution. Guess what? I saw that last weekend. Even though we had winds, there was a heavy layer. And somehow, that research, I'm not as optimistic as our family. They're being very gentle with you. I think it's a horrible research that shows a lot of progress that I think is not being adequately recorded. Because I think I live in the middle of that bullseye with over 200 members or more, and friends and family more than that. So I think that there should be a special subcommittee to address just that bullseye area, to study what we can do. Those warehouses have to stop. That Eastgate project is going to kill us. I was already prescribed an inhaler. You know what I'm saying? And I just have been home 10 years. I should have stayed in the west side. I live close to Beverly Hills, great area, but this is my hometown, and I feel God has sent me back for a reason. But your research, Dr. Epstein, needs to focus on that bullseye. Can't be that everything else looks nice and blue, and then all of a sudden we're in that yellow area. That's incorrect. That is immoral. It's enough. We have the train station. We have the freeways. Now we have all the south side of San Bernardino full of warehouses. And the airport was very nicely approved from this body. How can it not bring a lot more pollution? So I think enough is enough. I think that a subcommittee for just that area needs to be established, and you need to fight for our area no matter what. If we have to stop the growth of those warehouses and you not approve them, I think that has to happen. You need to think that we are people. You know, the same way, I don't know where you live, but I live in the middle of all of that now. And even when I lived in LA, it wasn't as bad as it is here. So I please request Dr. Burke or Mr. Chairman Burke that a subcommittee be established to deal with just that area. Thank you very much.
That concludes.
I think your testimony had great merit. And if the representatives on the board from that area request, I will appoint a subcommittee to study that problem.
Thank you.
We have testimony here, I'm sure. I thought you were going to testify. No. Francis? Come on, man. This is Francis comes and sees me from time to time.
Yeah, food was good today.
Oh, you want me some lunch too?
Yeah.
Hey,
Do you want
man.
some?
Nah,
Are you
I'm
sure?
a diabetic.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But you can give them to people
I
who
will.
you care about.
I will. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I just really wanted to quickly, since everybody knows that we did a little postcard drop, I just wanted to just read one of the comments that I think is just a little concise, but I think goes to the heart of what we're talking about. This is from Laura Juarez from LA. She said, "The most loving thing you can do for me and my community is to clean up the air and protect public health. And you can do that by adopting zero emission standards for freight facilities that will reduce carbon pollution." And so I know I'm specifically talking about the port right now. And I think that, it's been a pretty crazy ride. I don't know how many people here have been engaged in what the ports of LA and Long Beach are doing, but they were going to adopt the clean truck rate actually yesterday. But they last second ditched that proposal because nobody was happy with it. And I think specifically the ones that we need to listen to the most are the environmental justice communities who this decision will be impacting the most. I think that one of our biggest fears, and it's in our natural gas fact sheet, is that the big thing that they want to do is treat near zero emissions as if it's zero emissions. And although we might say that it's going to cut down on the immediate pollution, we might make 2023 air pollution goals, but the reality is that that means more pipelines, that means more gas being burned in our gas plants that are already impacting those very communities, and ultimately just creating a set of failure for our climate goals as well as our actual public health goals. Because again, it's not like the trucking companies at the port are going to be paying for those people's medical bills. It's not like they're going to be bringing in and creating funds for the climate refugees across the world. This is really the scare that we have right now, why we think zero emissions is the standard. And we understand that the Air Quality Management District doesn't have that much power, or may not perceive that it has that much power over the ports. But we're asking that you do everything that you can, because it looks like the ports aren't going to do the jobs themselves. And so we're please asking you as community, as people who are concerned, as people who are giving you chocolate hearts, that like we really care about this and we really need you to do whatever you can to make sure the ports adopt zero emission trucks as soon as possible, not near zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
Should I hang out here?
Thank you. Those are not hearts, those are lungs.
Oh, my bad.
Okay. Philip, do you want to testify? Oh, two? Two? Okay. That's actually, that's all the testimony we have on this item from the Lux. No motion is required for this. So we will move on to item 2.
Good morning, Chair Burke, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Reese. I'm an Assistant Deputy Executive Officer here at the district, and I'm going to give an update on where we are with developing an MOU with the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Just a quick background to recap where we've been. Back in May of 2018, the board gave us direction on 5 different facility-based mobile source measures. These are measures aimed at getting emission reductions from the mobile sources that are attracted to certain facilities. Ports are one of them. We have the largest ports complex in the U.S. in our district, and as such, it attracts a lot of vessels, trucks, cargo handling equipment, and so a lot of emissions associated with the ports. Now, the ports had been developing and implementing their Clean Air Action Plan. They did an update in 2017. Because they went ahead and did that, and there were a lot of very impressive goals in the Clean Air Action Plan, it made sense to us to recommend to pursue an MOU approach with the ports, an MOU that would basically establish targets from some of the elements from the CAAP and implement them and get emission reductions that way, instead of pursuing a more regulatory approach that we looked at for some of the other categories. I'm going to talk in the next few slides about the port's Clean Air Action Plan. So this is the plan that the ports themselves have been developing. There's some key components of this plan. One is on drayage trucks, and so this is implementing a clean truck program to clean up the drayage fleet. This component is really the heart of the Clean Air Action Plan. It's the element that is going to get the most emission reductions, or was targeted that way. There's some other elements as well, so some targets on cargo handling equipment, on ocean-going vessels to get cleaner vessels and have incentive programs in place for incentive programs on harbor crafts, and then also increase in use of locomotives. So that's essentially the core of the CAAP.
Can I ask just on the slide?
Sure.
About the Clean Trucks program, how does that align with some of the public comments that were made?
I'm going to get into that in later slides, so we go through the presentation, but the ports have just come out with their a truck rate for the Clean Truck program, and so I'll talk more about that as I get through the presentation.
I'm interested in juxtaposing public comments and their call to action with the measures that were highlighted.
Got it. So in the CAAP, the Clean Truck Program, it's effectively a truck rate would be levied against vehicles, and there'd be an exception for vehicles that are near zero or zero emission. And so the truck rate is supposed to be designed at a level that would change behavior, so provide, folks would have a motivation to purchase near zero and zero emission trucks instead of more diesel trucks. There's also some other forces. So, for example, pre-2014 trucks in 2018, they can no longer register in the drayage program, so they can no longer go to the ports. But this program is supposed to, be very effective in turning over the truck fleet and getting very high penetrations of near zero and zero emission trucks. And if you look again at the CAAP, they modeled several scenarios where they thought that, what this could look like in practice. Now, at the time of establishing the CAAP, the ports did not establish a rate for the trucks. That's something that they wanted to have informed by an economic study because they were concerned about potential cargo diversion. And it makes sense that you would do a study to evaluate what an appropriate level would be. But they modeled a range of scenarios with different penetration in the fleet. And so you can see that for some of these scenarios, some very significant conversions of the fleet in the near term, 2023, where we need a lot of NOx emission reductions. And so this chart here, this shows that in some scenarios you have up to 90% of the fleet distribution would be near zero emission, with the scenario 7 has up to 14% of the fleet would be zero emission by 2024. So again, we would get some fairly significant emission reductions at those levels. So now moving on to our draft MOU concept. This is an idea that we would have a contractual agreement with the ports, where we would work with the ports to develop targets for specific elements of the CAAP. The CAAP itself has very high goals, but it does not have specific performance targets. So we wanted to work with the ports to see if there were targets we could put in place, and then the ports would agree to implement that. We would then ourselves quantify what the emission reductions would look like from the ports meeting those targets. We would work with EPA to ensure that we get SIP credits for that. But more importantly, we would agree to cover any potential shortfalls. So if the ports were to agree to targets and do all of the work they needed to, but for whatever reason they didn't meet those targets and their emission reductions were not realized, we were the ones on the hook to get those emission reductions, not the ports. So we've been working on that concept with the ports, and it's been a little bit of a slow process. As you may recall, we got initial board direction in May of 2018 to proceed. Initially when we reached out to the ports, we had a little reluctance in terms of proceeding. It took until probably fall of 2018 where we could start working on the MOU in earnest. We've had many meetings with port staff since then. There have been multiple iterations of draft MOU language. We've also had multiple public working groups and our technical meetings, which are also public meetings, but more focused on getting groups together to figure out how many emission reductions you could get from some specific elements. We were originally scheduled to go in front of the governing board in November of 2019. We pushed that back. We delayed it because the ports were late in developing their clean truck program, mostly because their clean truck, the economic study that was to inform that program was delayed. And so it made sense to wait for that and to see what that would look like. In terms of the current status of the MOU, through all of our discussions with the ports, we've really backed down on a lot of these elements. And so initially we hoped that we would have some targets for the truck program, for cargo handling equipment, for ocean-going vessels. Through our conversations with the ports, understanding that would be very difficult to quantify and difficult to implement. So for most of those measures, we're only having reporting requirements. But we are focusing on the Clean Truck Program. That is, again, the cornerstone of the Clean Air Action Plan. It's the one where we expect that we should get significant emission reductions, and that's one where we can quantify some credits. Where we are today is we actually don't have agreement on MOU language. We've gone through multiple rounds of drafts. Most recently in late 2019, where we had another draft with additional red lines and edits, so we're still, I think, fairly far apart. And some of our concerns, kind of key concerns on this with the truck rate, right now, the MOU language does not reflect a firm commitment for a particular truck rate. There is something that the ports are working on. They just announced their draft truck rate, but the MOU language refers to the fact that the ports could change that truck rate at any time. We're also concerned that the proposed rate that's come out isn't sufficient to achieve the CAAP goals. So it doesn't even achieve the minimal goals that the CAAP established, let alone any of the further goals. And we don't think it's sufficient to change over the fleet or to meet the goals that we need. And then there's also some uncertainty regarding how the ports plan to spend the money, what the revenue structure would look like, and so we're concerned about those details. I'll talk a little now about the proposed Clean Truck Program that ports recently came out with. Again, this was informed by an economic study that the ports conducted to evaluate what potential impacts of cargo diversion would result from the truck rates. The big change is that the CAAP focused on the clean truck rate as a way to change behavior, as a way to encourage fleet operators and fleet owners to buy cleaner trucks. Now the clean truck rate is looked at as a way to fund an incentive program. It's still good. I mean, incentive programs, we're very supportive of that. And so if you're able to raise a bunch of money, that can still accomplish a lot of goals, but it is a change in focus. And then we're also concerned that the language discussing, it used to discuss in reference to near zero trucks. Now the language is talking about low NOx trucks. We're concerned that perhaps some of the funds raised by the Clean Truck Program would be used for trucks that are above that near zero standard, and so would result perhaps in more NOx emissions. The proposed rate is $10 per TEU. At that rate and the current cargo volumes, that would generate approximately $90 million a year. So that is a significant amount of money that's not to be sneezed at. But at the same time, that's at the very low range of the truck rate that had been discussed in the CAAP. The CAAP looked at a truck rate up to $70 per TEU. And then also for us, significantly, the economic study that the ports released shows very little diversion over a range of $5 to $70 TEU. The range is, I'm talking in the next slide, but it's up to 1.4% diversion. And again, at $10 per TEU, that's really not sufficient to turn over the fleet. It won't meet the CAAP goals. It won't get us the results we need from this sector.
It generates $90 million a year.
At the current volumes, it would expect it to generate approximately $90 a year. 90 million, sorry. So And one of the reasons this is important is that we have a very unique window right now to convert some of the port trucks. So there's 8,000 pre-2010 port trucks that are in the drayage fleet right now. CARB has their truck and bus rule that goes into full effect in 2023. Those trucks have to be replaced by model year 2014 or greater vehicles. A model 2014 truck is still fairly high in NOx. We really have a window of opportunity to get those trucks and have them converted over to near zero or zero emission, which are 90% cleaner than what those 2014 model year trucks are. So it's $10 per TEU. That rate is not sufficient to motivate folks to go ahead and buy those near zero emission trucks. Even the $90 million a year fund isn't sufficient to be able to turn that fleet over.
What is sufficient?
We'll get to that in the next slides.
There I go again, getting it.
You're interrupting my shtick.
Sorry, you guy.
So, again, this just shows the range of cargo diversion that we could see through the different rates that the ports modeled in their study, and you can see it's fairly inelastic. It doesn't really change much. Now, we recognize that diversion is an important consideration and needs to be looked at, but at 1.4%, that's really within the noise of what you would expect in year-to-year variability. We don't really see that as a huge impact compared to the pressing need to reduce emissions and the health impacts associated with the emissions. This chart here just shows growth volume forecast within the ports. There's 3 different scenarios of high growth. The middle blue line is the expected growth, and the green one at the bottom is a low growth scenario. We've also plotted the actual growth, which is in the little dotted black line at the bottom. You can see their actual growth for the last few years has been lower than what even their lowest emission projection. But the important point here is that at some point there's a capacity limitation on the ports, and that's represented by the dashed red line. And that shows that about 34 million per TEU is the upper limit of what the ports can handle. And that is constrained by efficiencies in the supply chain, that's constrained by some of the other operational constraints that the ports face. And then the other important point I want to make here is that the dashed blue line that you can see really close to the middle blue line scenario, that's what that middle growth path would look like if you had that 1.4% diversion. So if the ports were to impose a $70 per TEU truck rate, it shows there's very little change in terms of how you get to that ultimate capacity limitation. In fact, it delays it by about 3, or accelerates it by about 3.8 months. So ultimately, the ports are going to face a capacity issue. This 1.4% diversion, even at the higher range, doesn't really impact that so much. And then in terms of what the truck rate would look like, at $10 per TEU, we modeled what that could buy you, what that could get you in terms of emission reductions. In 2023, we think we can get about 1.4 tons per day, 1.14 tons per day. So, we're taking every ton we can get, but it's still a relatively modest amount. As you increase that rate, you're starting to see some more. At $50 per TEU, you're getting over 4 tons per day in 2023, which is a fairly significant chunk. It's bigger than a lot of the other strategies that we're looking at. We also then look to see what a truck rate would look like that could achieve the minimal goals that the ports established in the CAAP. And that rate is $68 per TEU. And if you were to implement that, I had to project that out into 2024 because we didn't have the same years for comparison, but you would get 7.4 ton per day emission reductions in 2024, which is very, very significant amounts. So where we are, we have some options that we're considering that we will be bringing to the board. So our first option is to continue with the status quo. Our second option is to continue working with the ports on an MOU, but work with them on an increased truck rate. The third option is to see if there's a regulatory authority we can use and start looking at rulemaking. So again, our first option, that would continue with the ports, assuming that they finalize the $10 per TEU truck rate. You've heard some significant opposition from stakeholders today. There's additional opposition that's out there. We're also concerned that there'd be uncertainty as to how much that would translate in terms of emission reductions because we don't know how that money ultimately would be spent. So I think there's still some, uncertainty and concerns about that. On our second option, so that's continuing with the MOU process, but work with the ports to see if we can increase. We'd like to see a reasonable level of about $50 to $70 per TEU, informed by that economic study, informed by all the other data that we look at. We know that we're going to get a lot more emission reductions on that. We would also like to work with the ports as to how that revenue would be allocated and spent to ensure that we can maximize emission reductions. And then our third option would be looking at an indirect source rule based on our indirect source authority. We would look at that regulation on terminal operators instead of on the ports themselves. This is because the terminal operators have a lot more control over the trucks that visit them, over the equipment, over the vessels, and the number of terminals is relatively limited, so it's a lot more of a manageable approach. We think if we proceeded with this route, we could get cover a lot more categories than what we have in the MOU right now. So this could be something that could affect cargo handling equipment, could affect the hovercraft, locomotives, etc. This could accelerate the emission reductions that we expect from CARBs regulations that are already being developed. Also get emission reductions from ships. We know there would be a lot of opposition. This would be highly controversial, but we think that if we did proceed down this route, we could develop a rule within a year. So to summarize where we are, we feel that the MOU process has at this point stalled out. We are disappointed with the current proposal on the truck rates, but we know that there's been a lot of work that's happened over the last almost 2 years at this point. We are willing to continue and work with the ports if we're able to add more commitments that are consistent with the original goals of the CAAP, such as a sufficient truck rate, and that the ports have a commitment to conclude negotiations within 3 months, because we've waited almost 2 years at this point. At the same time, we do want to explore development of an ISR to see what that regulation would look like, so that we have a backup in the event that we are unable to agree upon an MOU and proceed with the ports. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
What was the response of the options 1, 2, and 3 when it was presented to the ports? How did they respond?
So we've expressed our disappointment with the ports on the truck study. We're presenting these options for committee right now. We'll ultimately bring them to the board. The ports' response on the truck rate study is that their overriding concern is cargo diversion, and that if there's any cargo diversion associated with a truck rate, that's a very risky proposition for them. I think their position, and they haven't finalized the truck rate, and so we don't know what the ultimate number is or what that would look like, but they have communicated that they intend to start low and then see how it goes and then see if there's a possibility of increasing it. I think that's a difficult position for us to support based on the data that we see in the economic study, as well as the fact that we have a very pressing need to have emission reductions in the short term. This is one of the few things that we can do on facility-based measures that would actually get us significant emission reductions by 2023.
Councilman, let me just interject for a moment. So we're actually meeting with executive directors this afternoon, and we'll be discussing this. I'm sure they have some concerns, so we didn't present this to the ports first, we present this to committee.
Let me ask, if I might, Mr. Chair, who's doing the negotiation with the ports?
Most of the negotiations, the discussions have been going on at the staff level.
Is that the right level for what we're trying to do?
I believe so. We're trying to keep the...
We're at an impasse, we might try a different approach.
Well, as I said, we're discussing today with the port directors and myself. So we're going to go over those issues. But we've been in discussions where...
There's a change on both sides, but who's doing the negotiating?
It certainly can be an issue that we discuss with the directors.
Is the $10 truck rate, can you clarify, is that proposal option 1 new as far as is there an existing truck rate in place?
So this is a new program that's being
$10 just right now, 0.
This would be a new program, yes.
Okay. So why wouldn't we start?
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, Carlos.
Go ahead.
Because Judy is up next anyway. Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell.
I do have a question on, this is slide 13, this diversion rate. And you go through each truck rate and what we expect the diversion might be. I guess what would help me understand it, you've got percentages there, but if 17,000 TEUs, this is TEUs get diverted.
Correct.
This isn't ships.
That's correct, these containers.
And out of, what's the total we're looking at coming into our ports?
So current volumes are around, for both ports, around 9 million unloaded imports, so, yeah.
So 9 million total, so you get 17,000.
It's
what we
right,
lose.
I mean, it's a relatively small amount, and that's, what you're seeing is the very low end, the $5 per TEU rate that they established, that obviously goes up over time. But there's a lot of reasons why, in the economic study, why they believe that the diversion rate is so low. I mean, we're at a very good competitive advantage for our ports in terms of the time it takes for a container to travel from China to US. Competitive advantage in terms of the cost of that. It's a lot cheaper than some of the other ports. And so there's a lot of factors that go into that.
Sarah, could you elaborate on some of the timing differences between, for instance, here in Houston, distance, the cost?
So in getting a container, according to the port study, from central China to the US, if you run it through our ports, it's about 13 days. If you run it through Houston, it's about 26 days. Time is money in this business, and so that's a huge difference. The cost of shipping that container is about twice as much to Houston as it is to our ports. Again, that's the information that we found from the economic study, which was compelling to us in evaluating how this truck rate plays. Now, there's other ports where this cargo could be shipped to, so East Coast ports, and we understand that there's concerns with that. To the extent we are seeing diversion to those ports, it looks like it's coming from containers that are shipped out by rail, not by trucks. So we're seeing, those are again factors that we consider as we evaluate that study and see what would be reasonable in terms of a truck rate, recognizing that diversion is a real concern and wanting to work through that as well.
So what about West Coast? I mean, would these go to Oakland or Vancouver or?
There is some risk of diversion up to mostly Prince Rupert. Not to Oakland. It's a lot more expensive. The drayage fleet is a lot more expensive in Oakland, and there's also the way the shipping routes currently are is that there's some delay. In terms of getting to Oakland, it's about a 6-day delay, again, according to the port study. That could change. The shipping industry is dynamic, but the cost of the drayage fleet will probably be more predominant there. There is a risk of diversion to Prince Rupert. There's been an incredible amount of investment. It's a great place for the port because it's in the middle of nowhere and it is a rail line. So it's a very attractive option, and so that is a real risk.
And what about cost to Rupert? You gave us cost to Houston.
Yeah, cost to Rupert, I believe, is about equivalent. So Rupert it appears to be more of a risk for diversion. But again, to the extent that according to the port's own study, we've seen diversion, it's been on the rail lines, or the containers that are railed out, not the truck.
And what effect, we have a deep water port, what effect does that have? Because not all these ports are deep water, so we won't see diversion to non-deep water.
I believe we would likely be more, it's more of a risk with the deep water ports, but there are deep water ports that we do compete with.
Prince Rupert is a deep water port.
Prince Rupert is, and Houston is. Okay. Okay, that covers that part. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair. If, even at $50.
God, I'm still staring at the charts here.
I understand.
Could you please, thank you, we got to get this fixed. Anyway, here's my question, okay? This is going to get me run out of the room on a rail, okay? I'm telling you in advance, I asked Conno to open the door so when I run for the door, there's nothing between me and there to get to my car. So, if $70 gets you about 560 million?
It's, I think it's more than
About
that.
600.
That's simple math, man.
Yeah.
Gets you about 560 million.
More than that.
So that's about halfway to what you need a year
Yes.
to meet your requirements, right? So, since the ports don't want to agree to that, think it's too high, what happened, and I know that we cannot write a fee rule because that's currently against the law. But is there room for a mitigation rule which would apply a $70 fee?
So, Dr. Burke, this is
Excuse me,
Barbara.
I'm going to the door now.
So, there
there are some options that could possibly be considered and need to be looked at. For example, in some of our rules, we have authorized an optional compliance mechanism, whereas where the facility has the choice of either complying with the rule limit or paying a mitigation fee.
Yes,
And
yeah,
so,
I got that.
as we develop a potential indirect source rule, that is an option that we can consider for a method of structuring the rule. We also could talk to the legislature about possibly adopting a fee on the containers.
The legislature would never do it. So the question becomes, here's what buffaloes mean. And Larry, maybe you can help me out there. If the inlet, if the bullseye that we were talking about is in the Inland Empire, why wouldn't the Inland Empire want to support this?
Support what, Dr. Burt?
It's some kind of move to get the ports to clean up those trucks.
Well, we do support cleaning up the trucks. And my question would be that even at $50 or $70 a TEU, is it really realistic to expect that you're going to get significant NOx reductions by 2023 or 2024 in the next 2 or 3 years?
That's a legitimate question. So that's a weighing question.
Yeah, we actually addressed that in the slides where we show the projections.
I saw that, but is that realistic?
So that would be realistic in terms of having a pot of money available, because there's a lot of those trucks that are pre-2010 and they're forced by 2023 because of the CARB truck and bus rule to upgrade.
Right.
And so it's that window of opportunity to those trucks, if there's funds available, that they can upgrade to a near zero or zero emission technology instead of a 2014 diesel truck, which would be their cheapest option. Yeah, that they have a deadline. They have to face that. It's about 8,000 trucks that have to do that.
Yes, Ms. Mitchell?
Well, herein lies a little bit of a dilemma, because since they have to, by 2023, have to be 2010 or newer, there is a bit of a danger that they'll go to just a diesel truck that's 2010 or newer.
That's correct.
And this, I've been concerned about this both at the district and at the CARB level, because we're working on a number of different rules to go to clean trucks. So I'd be interested in ideas from staff as how do we prevent that from happening? Can we require 0.02 NOx, or what can we do to sort of get where we need to be so we're not turning over a bunch of trucks to dirty diesel? I mean, that's the absolute thing we don't want to see happening.
Well, we can't require a standard, and that's why there's been such a focus on the incentive side. And that's why when you look at the size of the incentive pool, it matters. If we don't have a large enough pool, then what you described is exactly what will happen. We won't have enough funds to divert the purchases of those diesel vehicles to cleaner technology. And so that's why the size of the fund is so important. And you can actually see the projection numbers based on there. And it's when you have the regulatory certainty of CARB's rules that's pushing it forward. It's now trying to push it forward in the cleanest possible way. And so the funding aspect is critical. I do have a question, though, and I know Mayor McCallum and Dr. Burke, you both said the legislature would never do a container fee. The legislature did do a container fee. It was on the governor's desk.
Schwarzenegger vetoed it.
He vetoed it. But there was a willingness and appetite to do it, and I guess that might be something that at least would be worth considering. Now, of course, this is coming from the person who's leading the voter district authorization. We see what kind of success we're having thus far, but we're going to continue to beat that drum. But I think that a container fee option might be a good option to what it is that we're asking for. And it gets to what a lot of people have said in the sense of it's really having the large organizations pay for that at a very, very slight incremental unit cost. I think when we had looked at the goods of the containers, it was an additional 2 or 3 cents per item. as I recall. So it's an option I think that we should consider.
If I can add one thing, sorry.
Mr. Rodriguez?
So just again, being new here, I assume there were specific reasons the governing board had supported a path MOU previously, so rather than rulemaking, so why would we pivot to that now?
So the presentation that we gave to the board was to move forward on an MOU and to report back. And that if we weren't making progress, that there were other options that were available. This has been consistent with the way that we approached airports, where again, there was some concern, maybe we should have moved to a ISR on airports. But we were able to work through and get an MOU. So in this particular case, we've been in negotiations. We believe that there's an opportunity now to move forward. The negotiations have taken much longer than we had anticipated. We're not seeing the kind of progress. And at the end of the day, when we talk about some of the things that we as a district were willing to do, we took on a lot of the things that we originally had hoped the port would address. We were taking on the actual obligation of fulfilling the SIP shortfall. All the onus would have been on us, and we still haven't been able to reach agreement even on that very aspect. So we're at a point where obviously it's taken some time. We're coming back, we're presenting options, and that's, I think, one of the prudent things that we can do. We can go back and continue those negotiations, but I think we need to put a time frame on those. I think we need to explore those other options and see what they might look like, so that you as the committee and the board has a range of solutions that we can deal with.
Didn't you say earlier that there was going to be a meeting?
This afternoon.
Well, I heard loud and clear that you're not seeing the progress that you would like up to this point, but I'd like to see the roll with the glass half full, and you do have a meeting coming up.
Yes.
I would be interested in hearing about the results of that meeting.
Sure.
And making a decision based more informed on feedback, the input, and just your overall assessment of that meeting. So I'm eager to hear about the results of that, and also curious if there's been any input from them on a specific option that they deem is viable. That we heard directly in writing or otherwise.
Well, as I said, we're meeting with them this afternoon.
Prior
this was
to-
presented to you first.
So no, we have not heard a preference yet on any of these
No,
options.
no.
Option one is, what,
Well,
they would agree to.
we're moving
$10.
forward on
Have you
option
received
one.
any correspondence
Well,
of that
that's
nature?
the course of the negotiations, right? That's where we've been going back and forth, where we would provide an agreement, there'd be a red line, we think we would address those. We send it back, then all of a sudden we're getting more comments. You know, part of the concern was that we wanted to move forward diligently in an expeditious manner. That hasn't been the case. You heard some of the reasons why. There were delays in the economic study, there were changes in scope, differences in understanding.
The
All of
spirit
these
of an
things.
MOU is collaboration and give and take. So I'm interested, I don't see any input in writing from the stakeholders that it would be impacted by $90 million or more. I don't see that here.
Yeah, and
Is there anything in writing that provides their input as to the preference, why not they would be
no.
supportive of the options 1 or 2?
In writing right now on those specific options, no.
So I would be interested in understanding what they view as the implications of these options, why and why not.
Sure.
So I can make a more informed decision.
And we're not asking you to make a decision right now. This is an information item only. This is something that would be brought obviously to the full board. So we want to present these options to you. And obviously we get feedback from you.
And if Mr. Rodriguez has time, you can take him with you to the negotiation session. So he can be in there full transparency.
I think that's what Mr. McCallum might have been alluding to.
Well, what I was suggesting is that we need to get more higher level people involved and maybe political people involved in this discussion. If we come to what we think is an impasse at the staff level, we need to raise the negotiation, if you will. And maybe need some political people in there too.
Because what
As I
I
said-
find really strange, Mr. McCallum, is that for probably a decade and a half when I first came here, man, the ports were just one of our best partners. I mean, they were out front trying to do everything. And all of a sudden, it was about the time that the lady who was on the Los Angeles City Council was the board chair there after she retired. When she left, just the things went totally the other way. And there had to be some reason, and I certainly don't know what it was. And I haven't heard anybody from the district articulate, you know, did we do something to them? Did they discover something we were doing that was counterproductive to their mission? I just don't understand what happened. So, you know.
We do have testimony as well, if there's no.
Yeah, okay, let's get this testimony rolling.
One more comment.
Okay.
So I've heard a lot about this economic study. It seems to be reinforcing some of these options. Is there consensus of the parties that you're meeting with that the data in the economic study is universal acceptance, that they view this as a study that they stand by, they agree with?
I think they would agree that the study is limited. And they would probably state that, and we'll hear from them. So actually, rather than hear from me, let's hear from them in terms of what they say about it.
Well, the economic study is mentioned a few times in your presentation, so I'm trying to understand if there's a consensus amongst the boards that they view that results as accurate and.
Well, rather than answer for the ports, I mean, I'll give you my perspective. Obviously, staff have taken a look at the data. We believe the data speaks for itself. And so when you look at the relative inelasticity, we don't see much cause for disconcerting or for dismissing that data.
Okay.
And so I'm sure that was part of the discussions that we're going to have today.
I will point out that it is a draft study. The boards have not finalized it, so they released the draft study in end of December, but they haven't moved to finalize it yet. They didn't
When will that be?
comment on it. I think the boards have to speak to that. I don't know. But I will say that there are other papers in the literature that support some of the conclusions of the study. So there were some other studies that happened at the time looking at impacts of a container fee on the West Coast and what that would do to diversion, and showing relatively modest amounts of diversion. Container fee is broader than a truck fee, but there's a lot of parallels, so you can look at that.
Well, I'll say that I do like the fact that there is some type of empirical economic study as a point of reference on the proposal. And if we at some point arrived at a rate, whether it's 10 or any of these other levels, it would be interesting to, let's just say it's 10, to be able to look at the impacts, measure the reductions over, whether it's a year or some period, and then juxtapose that with an economic impact as well to measure was there any job implication or just any unintentional consequence from an economic standpoint, and looking at that holistically. So just generally speaking, the fact that there is a reference to an economic impact, I think it's a positive thing, and I'd be eager to see that moving forward. Just, you know, whatever option is adopted, to juxtapose that with what are the economic implications. That should be something we always are mindful of. So I'm pleased to see that that's part of this discussion.
Absolutely.
Okay. Do your testimony. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Testimony?
Alicia Anciso.
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 E-N-C-I-S-O.
Anciso.
N and a C and an A. I'm sorry, I'm glad I was here today. I think it's time maybe to ask the new woman council on the LA City Council, the new president, Nuri, to do, maybe Gloria can pass the baton to her so that we can revisit the relationship with the port. But also, it seems to me that that 2 to 3%, Dr. Berg, that you feel may not happen, maybe somebody from Long Beach, a legislative representative from Long Beach, and Eloise or Connie from the Inland Empire, you know, Senator Connie Leyva, could represent and put another proposition together so that we can address that. Because in our area, as I mentioned earlier, we're part of the bullseye. It is really very detrimental to all of us. I have grandnieces on respirators at night sometime, and it's very hard to see that. It's very painful to watch them cry and go through that treatment. So I would like to encourage and assist in any way I can. I know some of these players myself from being in LA for so long, and then now back here, that we start that dialogue. And I'll actually encourage that each one of those legislators have someone attending these meetings, because I don't see the representatives here. They're field representatives. So that would be my recommendation there. And I'm going to propose it to them myself. And I'm hoping that I can speak to Mayor McCollum later about the committee for the San Bernardino area. If we could get together and create one, as you said, it would be you approved that. So that's my comment.
On that, you need to speak to the Inland Empire representatives on the board.
Yes, sir.
Get them to speak to me, okay?
All right. Yes, sir. Thank you very much for the time.
No problem.
So let's hear from Heather Tomley, Port of Long Beach.
Good morning. I'm Heather Tomley. I'm Managing Director of Planning and Environmental Affairs for the Port of Long Beach. The ports have had a long cooperative working relationship with AQMD. We've worked together on our Clean Air Action Plan development efforts since the first iteration in 2006. And over the years since, we've discussed strategy development, coordinated on our annual emissions inventories, and co-funded and partnered on numerous technology advancement projects. Through this partnership with AQMD and with other regulatory agencies, stakeholders, and most importantly, the monumental efforts of our industry partners, we've been very successful. DPM emissions are down 87%, and NOx emissions down by 58% compared to 2005. Through our Clean Trucks program, we've reduced DPM emissions from trucks by 97%, and we're still committed to do more. Our 2017 Clean Air Action Plan update sets a goal to get to zero emission trucks by 2035. This will be a huge challenge, and as we have always said, it will require all of us to work together collaboratively. Since mid-2018, the ports have been working with AQMD staff on development of this MOU. We have calls every 3 weeks with AQMD staff on the MOU language, in-person meetings every 2 weeks in Diamond Bar to discuss the emissions modeling of the technical working group. And once a month, our executive directors are scheduled for a call with Mr. Nastri to discuss our progress. We've dedicated significant staff time and resources to this challenging effort, and we've responded to numerous data requests, provided the first draft of the MOU, and numerous comments on subsequent versions, including the most recent draft, which we provided to AQMD staff in mid-December. All of this effort has been with a focus to be constructive, to get this right, and to develop an agreement that works for all of our agencies. At the same time, we're continuing to move forward with development of programs consistent with our Clean Air Action Plan, including technology development and demonstration of over 100 pieces of zero-emission cargo handling equipment and updates to our Clean Trucks programs to move towards achieving our goals. Through this effort, we've been open with AQMD staff, including sharing our Clean Truck rate proposal with them last October to allow opportunity to incorporate it into the MOU process as soon as possible. We intend to continue to work cooperatively with AQMD on advancing our shared goals, and we do not believe that our discussions have stalled. And frankly, we thought we were close, and we believe that we should be able to see the existing MOU option through. We've invested in this cooperative relationship, and we've seen the benefits. We strongly believe this is the best way to improve air quality and to protect the health of our local communities. Thank you.
Any other comment on any of the options? specifically?
Well, like I said, we've been working collaboratively with AQMD staff. The piece that has really been some of the holdup to get to this point is plugging in the exact rate amount for the clean truck program. And that's been going through a separate parallel effort. We've been working on our economic study. That was a very challenging task. Took a little bit longer than we originally thought it was going to. But we've worked through that process, and we were prepared to take the rate forward to our boards for their consideration. And we expect to be able to do that fairly quickly. Then we can plug that into the MOU, calculate the benefits, and complete that process. We think that we're on the right path. We think that option one of continuing on the path we're on is the appropriate path, and we've worked very closely with the AQMD staff to try to make this work.
The rate range that you guys are considering, is that consistent with option one or two? Do you are you prepared to give a sense of the range?
The proposal that staff from both ports are taking forward to our boards for consideration is the $10 per TEU rate. We think that that's the appropriate place for us to start. There's a lot of uncertainty. There is the information that was available through the economic study. Chris will be addressing that in a little bit more detail in his comments. There is the component that was the specific regression analysis, looking just at the variable of cost, looking at historical data over the last 6 years, and that can tell you some information, but there are a lot of additional factors. It's a very complex analysis to try to predict accurately of exactly how the industry is going to react. And we're hearing from a lot of folks that even $10 is too much for them to bear, and they're looking at different options for where to take their cargo. We think that the most...
in your study?
That's referenced in our presentation materials. It's included in the qualitative discussion within the study that is a companion to the regression analysis, and it's also a part of our staff proposal that we'll be taking forward to our boards. But we've made it clear that we think that it's the prudent approach is to move forward cautiously and to move forward with the $10 rate. Generating a fund of $90 million a year will be a significant source of funding to help transition these trucks into cleaner trucks. And we think that this is something that we continue to evaluate. Every year, our boards want to see where we are with the progress and what we've been able to achieve with that rate. And if we need to make adjustments over time, our boards are committed to do that. But at this point, there's so much uncertainty in the industry. We're seeing cargo losses. This last year, both ports, the complex is down 3.5% in cargo volume. And we're expecting this to be another down year. This is a really difficult time for us to move forward with something that's much more aggressive than that. We need to be able to move forward with something towards meeting our goals and generate the fund, cooperate with the other agencies to get additional funding to help supplement what we're doing. The California Air Resources Board is moving forward with some regulatory developments with their advanced clean truck rule and their eventual update to their drayage truck rule. All of these things working together, we think will help us to achieve our ultimate goals. And this is where we are recommending that we begin that process and where we think we should start. And we think it's the best way for us to move forward at this time.
Is there a sense of time period that you would be considering that fee to stay intact before considering an adjustment?
Our boards have asked for us to monitor our progress. I think that in the early stages, they'll be asking for pretty frequent updates on what we've been able to accomplish. At a minimum, once a year, I'm sure we'll be coming back to the boards and having them evaluate where we are, track the progress, and see if adjustments need to be made. But our boards, especially in the early years, are going to want to have very frequent updates of what we've been able to accomplish and what the effects have been.
The idea of certainty that you were referencing, so would you say potentially having that intact for 2 years before considering an adjustment, or is there any range of time that you would want to keep that rate in place before a subsequent increase would be considered?
So there's multiple sides to that, right? I think that the boards are going to want to have the opportunity to evaluate where we are and be able to make adjustments that they think are necessary. They also are very cautious about disruptions and uncertainty for the industry, because that is one of the factors that leads to folks making decisions to route their cargo through other gateways. So I think that they want to move forward with something so that we can proceed. They're also going to be wanting to make sure that the progress is that we're working towards meeting our goals and that the program is effective. They're also going to be monitoring what effect that has on the industry. There is no set time period for when it will be specifically adjusted. All of those factors are going to need to be monitored, and that's going to need to be the decision of our boards as we move forward.
Are you presenting to your board how that $90 million is going to be spent? What is the plan for that $90 million?
Right. So the way that we had laid out the path for establishing the fund and how the fund would be spent, we broke the process up into 2 steps, partly because we wanted to be able to identify what that rate was early so that that could be incorporated into the MOU process. But then we also need to wait until after the Air Resources Board adopts the low NOx manufacturing standard for engines. And after that time, we can move forward with the implementation tariff for the rate. It's also at that time that we'll bring forward the details on how the incentive program will be spent, because there's a lot of opinions about what's the best way to get the maximum benefit out of that fund. Once we identify what the fund amount will be, that gives us what we need to be able to structure how the funds will be spent. So we are providing early indications of how we think that fund should be spent, but we want to have stakeholder discussions over the coming months to really work through that structure. In our opinion, in the very early days, the trucks that are available today are those low NOx trucks, and we are working with the district on the goals that they have to try to maximize getting those trucks out there in the early years to get those benefits before 2023. So the funds will, by and large, be spent on those trucks and getting them into the fleet as quickly as possible. But our goals, our program, it's a zero emission program, and we want to transition to zero emission trucks as quickly as possible. Once those trucks are commercialized and are available, we anticipate transitioning the spending of the funds to focus on zero emission trucks, and we want to do that as soon as possible. And that switch will be made based off of the feasibility assessments that the ports have developed to identify when those trucks are feasible. We're hoping that could happen as soon as 2023.
Zero emission goal was 2035.
That's correct.
I believe the $10 amount moves you toward that 2035 goal, towards meeting that with confidence, or are you still assessing that?
Well, I think that we all along have been very clear that our program is intended to work in cooperation with other programs. We had never believed that we alone as the ports could solve this entire problem. And part of when we developed the Clean Air Action Plan, it was at the same time that the state was finalizing their Sustainable Freight Action Plan. We wanted to make sure that our Clean Air Action Plan essentially served as a local implementation plan for helping to accomplish the statewide goals. And we wanted to line ourselves up so that we could be first in line when funding opportunities came available through the state to supplement our efforts. So all along, all of the success that we've had over the years has been because of the partnerships that we've had with South Coast Air Quality Management District, California Air Resources Board, EPA, industry stakeholders, and others working together to try to find solutions. So our program will provide significant incentive funding to help support meeting that goal. That will need to be supplemented by additional funding from the state, funding from the industry and investments that they're making, coupled with long-term regulatory development at the statewide level moving towards those cleaner trucks. And it's that cooperation of all of those different elements coming together. That's been the model that's led to our success so far, and we believe that's the model that should continue to help us meet the success going forward. Thank you.
You say that, excuse me, you say that you had declined revenue in the last year or so?
cargo volumes down, complex-wide cargo volumes are down 3.5%.
Did you decrease your budget?
Did we decrease our budget? It has cargo volume declines will have an effect on our budget of how much.
It's a simple question. Did you decrease your budget? Yes or no?
Our budget is based off of what the revenues are that come in. If you're suggesting, have we delayed projects that we're investing in, and have
No, my question was very clear. Did you decrease your budget?
Our budgets are based off of the cargo that comes in. I believe it's essentially flat from what it has been. We are expecting that this year.
You can say, I don't know.
We are expecting
that
this
year.
You
You
can say,
I don't know, but I'm just asking you a yes or no question.
So
It's a yes or no question. Yes, we did increase the budget. No, we did not decrease the budget. I don't need all the other verbiage. Did you decrease the budget?
I don't have the exact numbers. I do know that
Then
we are
that's
forecasting
the
that
answer.
it
I
will be
don't
down
know.
this year.
I don't know. So my question to you, if you didn't decrease the budget, then, it leaves me with a surreptitious concern about your concern about the cost of what we're doing here. If you decrease the budget, I understand. If you cut positions, I know you didn't decrease marketing. So the question becomes, if you didn't decrease marketing, how can you talk about not doing things that are affecting people's health? You got some great talking points, and you sound just like I used to sound when I used to testify before the Los Angeles City Council about the marathon contract. I sounded just like you. But I know what I was talking about then, and I was still taking home my money. So, we're talking about a health issue here, and you're talking about market share. I'm not sure I get it. Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Chris Cannon from Port of Los Angeles. Chris.
Funny, the candy bar talking to, I've never seen that before.
Don't block it with your computer.
Okay, I'll try to help if I can. Short answer to your question, a lot of my presentation was covered by Heather in your questions, and so I'm going to change a little bit. I had to cut my budget 5%. My operating budget had to be cut 5%. We were very concerned about.
What is your budget?
My operating budget?
What's your responsibility?
I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Port and the Director of Environmental Management. All environmental programs are handled by me.
Was that
So
5% cut across the board?
Yes, it was.
Okay, I like that.
It's the truth. We weren't happy about it, and it forced me to have to cut down to the bone some of the programs that we do. Let me start by saying this. First of all, my name is Chris Cannon. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Port of Los Angeles, and I'm happy to be able to talk to you today. I want to assure you that Gene Soroka of the Port of Los Angeles and Mario Cordero of the Port of Long Beach share the strongest commitment to environmental stewardship and our common goal of working with our partners to help reduce air quality impacts from port-related sources. We're especially concerned about climate change. We are, a lot of the things that Heather talked about, I won't repeat. We certainly believe we're the cleanest port complex in the United States and maybe the world, and we want to continue that hard work. We're in the process of implementing the latest version of our Clean Truck program, and we believe that this program will help lead us toward our goal of zero emissions in 2035. But we face very strong headwinds in the Pacific shipping marketplace. We've lost market share at other ports in the United States for 18 straight years. In 2019, while ports of New York, New Jersey, Savannah, Norfolk, and Houston and others had significant growth, as Heather pointed out, the LA Long Beach complex actually declined in volume. We anticipate that will continue this year. Global trade policies and tariffs may further reduce volumes in 2020. And we have had direct communications with cargo owners that have told us that they if they continue to see cost increases in our complex, they will have no choice but to start to divert some of the discretionary cargo that they move through our ports. And this market study, the economic evaluation was discussed about in the model that talked about, they're referring to low elasticity for local cargo. We have a term that we use in the ports industry of discretionary cargo and non-discretionary cargo. Discretionary cargo is cargo that the cargo operator or cargo owners have the discretion to move to different ports depending upon where they want to, what they see as costs and market. The non-discretionary cargo is the stuff that there's less discretion. It's the local stuff. It's coming to places like Diamond Bar and elsewhere where it's a lot harder to find alternatives. The low elasticities that were shown in that model that is referred to in that study talked about that, but they were short term, and they were all done prior to global trade policies kicking in and a number of other factors, and all this is discussed in the economic study. There are a number of factors that go into play as to how you evaluate diversion. So I don't want to, I understand my time is up, but let me just say this. The only way for us to be successful is to work together. I want to encourage that the process of working with all the executive directors has worked. The last 2 months, Wayne has not been available, and I think that our progress has suffered from the lack of Wayne's leadership. And so we look forward to Wayne participating in those discussions again, and we hope that can be accomplished. So I'll stop there.
I hope you're right. Thank you for your testimony. You got any more, Ms. Mitchell?
Yes.
You can't go to sleep there.
Here's what I was thinking.
I know we're boring, but
Here's what I was thinking. I wonder if Gene Soroka and Mario Cordero have been involved in our negotiations. You can answer that here.
They've been having discussions with Wayne, as Chris pointed out. They have been meeting on a monthly basis.
So let me sort of share the nature of the negotiations. I think each of us as executive directors look to our staff to try to work these details out. And when there's an impasse, it's usually raised to one of us. And then what we try to do is discuss that amongst the three of us. And I think that some of the challenges that we've had have been timing. So for instance, the fee that the ports are considering, in 2 weeks they were going to be going to their commission. And unfortunately, as Chris said, unfortunately I've been ill and I haven't been here the last couple weeks, and so I haven't had a chance to engage directly with them. But we're meeting with them today. I'm confident that when the three of us get together, we're usually able to make sure that our staffs move forward. We have some serious concerns that we've talked about amongst ourselves on the MOU, and I think that understanding the recent status of the MOU is going to be one of the topics for our discussion today. The cost, there was no, unfortunately, discussion amongst the three of us in terms of where that costs were, what that meant to us, and what our consideration was. And so that'll be the main topic of discussion, I'm sure, today. So
are they coming?
They're coming here today.
These two guys are coming.
Yeah.
Gene and Mario are coming.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we've met at the Port of Long Beach offices. We've met at the Port of Los Angeles office. They're coming here today. So as I said before, we usually do have the discussions.
Then why didn't we carry this over until you had that meeting and find out if there's any progress? Why are we going through all this how's the ride today?
Well, we're going through this today. Well, the meeting that was just arranged for today was arranged this week. And so obviously the materials that we bring forward to you, we had prepared and submitted last week. The reason that we had done that is because we were gonna actually try to come before the board in March for the port status. But that's for the MOU, and we're not there. And I believe we've said along that, there are things that are taking forward, we're still seeing progress, and I think that's been the key. We wanted to provide that update. I think there's a recent lack of progress, and so that's in part what we wanted to make you guys aware of.
And if I can add,
What's the deal with we couldn't get a hold of Wayne? What was that about?
Well, unfortunately, I was out pretty much the last 2 weeks.
I know you were
between-
sick. I know you were sick. I saw the kidney stones myself. It was horrible. But
It's
don't
not
send me
bad,
those
yeah.
pictures anymore either.
Yeah.
It was horrible, man. Couldn't eat lunch that day. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we'll move
Ms.
on.
Mitchell, do you have further testimony?
I do. Greg Roche from Clean Energy.
Hello, good morning, committee members and staff. I'm Greg Roche with Clean Energy. I spend my days working out of our Carson office, living and breathing and working in the ports of LA and Long Beach, doing outreach to drivers and truckers to get them to take advantage of grants from AQMD and others for clean trucks. And you heard a lot of compelling testimony this morning so far from people in the bullseye. I have full confidence you'll hear more about that, which tells us two things. Number one, the status quo is not acceptable. It doesn't get us to where we need to go. Number two, we cannot sit back and wait for zero emissions to arrive, because that bullseye is there and is only going to get worse unless we take actions today. And that brings me to the Cleaner Action Plan and the 8,000 trucks that staff pointed out earlier. When you actually read the Cleaner Action Plan, it embraces an aggressive, multi-pronged approach of using near zero technologies. I know a lot of people don't want to admit that or acknowledge that. They don't like that, but that's the facts. You can read the CAAP. It's about near zero and zero emissions to solve this really hard problem that we're facing. And the opportunity with the 8,000 trucks is, it's my understanding, if you can replace those 8,000 trucks, which will be gone in the next 3 years, you will reduce NOx emissions from the trucks by 80%. 80% emission reductions over 3 years of NOx with available technology. And Board Member Mitchell, you asked, well, what can be done to prevent those 8,000 trucks from being replaced with other used diesel trucks? Because that is what will happen without intervention. And the answer is this: the ports already have adopted a requirement that trucks in the drayage truck registry that are newly registered be model year 2014. They can take the same action, because they've already set precedents. They can take the same action and say, starting tomorrow, newly registered trucks need to be 0.02 near zero. CARB has submitted a very well-written, detailed legal opinion that establishes why the ports can take that action. And even aside from the CARB letter, the ports have already taken that action with their 2014 rule. So the table is set. We can get to these 8,000 trucks. We can get 80% NOx reduction, and we can do it now to get at the bullseye that we saw earlier today. So thank you very much for the opportunity to give you comments.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Michael Munoz.
You might be in the overflow room.
Oh, the overflow. And they will
Probably had to leave.
Okay, Chris Chavez, you're here.
Good morning, members. My name is Chris Chavez. I'm the Deputy Policy Director for Coalition for Clean Air. I am also a resident of West Long Beach and a member of the AB 617 Community Steering Committee for Wilmington, Carson, and West Long Beach. I want to support the comments made by the staff regarding the port process. The port MOU process is stalled and is an endless cycle of what's in and what's out. But what we can be sure of is that as long as that cycle continues, What's definitely going to be in is the dirty air in our lungs. This approach, should it continue as is, will not get the job done. As we just saw in the ozone update, emissions from the ports has region-wide implications and ramifications in that those reductions have been declining or leveling out. Merely codifying goals, which are aspirational, I would note, needs to be stronger. We need to have a requirement. That 2035 goal needs to be a requirement. As we've seen, the woefully inadequate truck rate that is being proposed will not help our communities. Our communities can expect to continue seeing diesel trucks polluting their communities for years to come under that scenario. I understand there is concern about displacement and costs, but these concerns are moot and are trivial if a federal implementation plan is installed because of violating the Clean Air Act. We could see massive changes in port operations. We could see billions lost in federal highway funding. Most importantly, however, are the impacts on our communities from these diesel trucks. If we don't clean up the goods movement system, people, mostly low-income communities and communities of color, will needlessly get sick and die. That's going to cost thousands of thousands, billions of dollars in health costs, in lost productivity, and so on. We have the technology today to bring cleaner air to the South Coast Basin. We need to get serious about deploying it, and we need to begin building our zero emissions futures for South Coast. We really want to make sure that the truck fee that is implemented is ultimately sufficient. I know in our letter we proposed $35 to $50. If higher can be done, certainly we would be open to that. And then also need to make sure that, sorry, my apologies, that we support ISR over an MOU ultimately in the long run. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
And we have Carlo De La Cruz.
Hello again. So again, my name is Carlo De La Cruz and I'm with the Sierra Club, but today I want to, just for the record, be able to say all the organizations and all the different community groups that support a much higher fee. So when it comes to the three options, I want to thank staff for their hard work and their due diligence. I've been in those bi-weekly meetings. It's like trying to drink out of a fire hose, the amount of information, the amount of complexity. But we need a higher fee. We know we need a higher fee not only for clean air, for the transition to zero emission, which I thank Chris and Heather for coming here today for their candor and articulating that the goal is 100% zero emission by 2035. That goal was made in 2016 by both Mayor Garcetti and Mayor Garcia, and I would really celebrate the ports when we reach that goal. With that said, the following groups support at least a $50 fee, not only to protect our clean air, but to protect the drivers, because right now a $10 fee will be too easily passed on to the drivers and the workers, and it won't protect, especially in this post-AB5 context. So not only does the Electric Bus and Truck Coalition, which includes Earth Justice, Environment California, Food and Water Action, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Union 11, NECA Los Angeles, Jobs to Move America, the Sierra Club, Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice, Natural Resources Defense Council, San Pedro Peninsula Homeowners Coalition, Urban Environment Policy Institute of Occidental College, West Long Beach Association, Los Angeles Alliance for New Economy Lane, Breathe LA, Coalition for Clean Air. These are all groups that support a $50 fee if feasible. We need to be able to have a real conversation about how we move the ports because progress has stalled. We haven't seen the type of progress that community is satisfied with, and that's why all these groups are really concerned about the $10 fee. It is really a non-starting point, and I do hope that when we have a joint, whatever we have the commission meeting that will consider the fee, that we don't start at such a low starting point, because it does provide a false narrative that we can't even move the ball from here, and that we're not able to see the real data that could show us what a real higher fee will actually look like. I want to point to slide 17 or slide 5, which shows CAAP's 2024 projected truck fleet distribution. This is an analysis of what the distribution will look like in 2024, but it's based off of the $10 fee, and that is only a placeholder. If the ports were to propose a higher fee, AQMD would then be able to do the analysis. And already I've heard this chart being taken out of context and being shown to CARB to other agencies as reasons why, oh, well, we're only going to get near zero. I know that oftentimes it feels like we're trying to needle you with this near zero versus zero, but really what we're trying to ask is that we don't tie us into another decade, 2 decades of fossil fuel infrastructure that includes refueling stations, storage stations, refineries that these South Bay communities, these LA and Long Beach communities also live beside. So that is really the reason why these communities feel so strongly about zero emissions. It is not semantics, but we cannot trust clean energy and SoCal Gas when they say they want to burn more gas and more combustion. That is their bottom line. We're trying to protect community health. Thank you again.
Thank you for your testimony.
That's it from here, no more cards.
Okay, we have some here. Mr. Yang is here. Would he come to the vacant chair?
Hello again. Yeah, so I think I actually spoke at the wrong, thank you. I think I actually spoke at the wrong item. Again, these are the chocolate lungs. Thanks for correcting me. Yeah, so I think I just kind of want to double down exactly on what was just talked about. Thank you, Carlo, for talking about it. Our future is 100% zero emissions, and we all know that. I think what we're very unconvinced by from watching this whole ports process is that that commitment seems to go out the window and just talk again. The idea that we're going to have a low truck fee that it seems to be unanimously understood is that not only are those fees insufficient to show how they're going to purchase zero emission vehicles at the scale that needs to happen, but also that there's no guarantee that those funds will go only for zero emissions. Right now, it looks like natural gas and I guess in general the fossil fuel industry is more or less kind of happy that this is how it's going to go because it means they get to have a place in the world. But we all know, and the integrity of the CAAP goals, of the state goals, of the air quality management goals is to show that we can be the leaders to get off of fossil fuels so that we can clean up our mess, our air, our land, our water, and actually have a livable future that we can all be proud. And so that people don't have to be on respirators just by growing up on the wrong side of town, or just to say that they can be proud in LA but have to go to the hospital every day. That's just unacceptable. And please remember that these are chocolate lungs because we're just trying to live and we love our clean air. Thanks so much.
I love this guy.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Raj Dillon, and I'm here representing Breathe LA. Some of you might be familiar with my boss, Mark Carroll, filling in for him today, talking about the issue regarding ports. And we've been very engaged with the ports regarding the CAAP and the Clean Trucks program. We've attended several Harbor Commission meetings and CAAP update meetings and shared our concerns that a $10 per TEU rate will not achieve the goals and objectives that are in the CAAP. And we've joined with the list of orgs that Carlo mentioned earlier in advocating for a $50 per TEU clean truck fund rate following the release of the port's economic study, which, by the way, an economic study that did not talk about health externalities at all. In addition to a rate of at least $50 per TEU, we at Breathe LA advocating for a change to the truck registry by allowing diesel trucks to still register with the ports well beyond the targeted CTF rate implementation. The ports are basically encouraging diesel trucks to register at the registry, which runs contrary to the CAAP goals. And I understand some of the frustration that staff has had with the ports. We've had several meetings with port staff and officials and really haven't been able to get a lot of straight answers from them, quite frankly. And we keep hearing from port staff that they have this in the CAAP goal and that in the CAAP goal, and these are their objectives in the CAAP, but the policies that the ports are pursuing are inconsistent with their own objectives in the CAAP. And so to kind of bring this all together, we support AQMD staff recommending a continuation with the MOU only if the ports commit to a meaningful increase in the truck fee and to do so in the next 3 months. And if that doesn't happen, we would support AQMD considering an ISR moving forward in that direction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Then we have Mr. Todd Kemp.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to say this is what it's all about on this slide. So can I just? 8,000 diesel trucks. 8,000 diesel trucks. That's the opportunity before the Air Quality Management District to affect change. Those are 8,000 diesel trucks that we need today. Whether they are near zero or zero, that is a win. That, you know, representing clean energy, you'd have to ask the fossil fuel folks if they'd be happy with the status quo. We're the renewable fuel industry. We have 100% renewable fuel throughout our system. And we're not happy. The current situation right now, we are facing a very, very, very bad outcome by 2023 if we don't do something. You have the opportunity. It's very clear by the numbers that if you did at least do near zero emission truck technology and replace those 8,000 trucks, you would get an 80% reduction. That's completely in line with what we need to do at the federal level with the Clean Air Act. And if this agency can't force the ports, which are a significant source of pollution for our basin, to rotate or transform those trucks through an MOU or indirect source rule, we're in trouble. So here's my recommendation. Scrap option one. Option one does not work. Just doing an MOU, that's not going to work. I don't care what anybody says. We need those trucks to be reduced to their emissions today. Option two, if you do an MOU and you look at the truck rate, look, don't adopt a truck rate. Don't change the truck rate. Just require the ports to adopt a 0.02 gram standard as their minimum standard. That way, they can figure it out. And if our worst case scenario is getting a near zero emission truck that reduces diesel emissions by 90% for NOx, and by the way, with renewable natural gas, you could get into carbon negative emissions for greenhouse gases, that's a win. Now, I'm not saying that we should be doing both zero and near zero. We're looking forward to a gaseous future. We need to do near zero emission technology. It's not legacy lost capital assets. We can bridge to hydrogen. We need hydrogen for long range transportation. I have nothing to do with the gas company. All I have to do is bringing clean trucks to this basin and working with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is trying to do its job, and we need to do our job. We cannot allow 8,000 trucks to go by the wayside, not under our circumstances, and certainly not with an administration that currently wants to penalize us and punish us for failing to do our jobs. We need to do our job. Thank you.
That concludes our testimony from here. I will be speaking for Harvey Etter. Seriously, you know, I understand the ports are between a rock and a hard place. Because if you got a situation where the current administration is trying to shovel the shipping to Texas and you're getting a declining market share, and a guy comes in and says, I want to charge you more so you can clean the air, your natural reaction is to oppose that, or to slow it down, or to do as little as you can. But the problem is that while you're operating, you're still creating emissions, which are harmful to the general public. So I'm hoping with all my heart that Wayne and the poor people can find a path to something that is meaningful, because both of us digging our heels in is not a productive manner to move forward with, but we have to find some kind of pathway to solve this problem. This item does not require a vote. Okay, Phil, that on item 3 and item 4, I'm going to carry those over to the next meeting because this meeting, I always chide Ms. Mitchell on Ledge running into admin's time, man. This meeting ran 2 hours. How long do you think that your presentation on 3 and 4 will be?
I'm done. There's no presentation.
It's written.
Okay.
Just written reports.
Reports. Yeah, written reports.
Okay. Do we have any other business before the Mobile Source Committee this morning? Okay. Do we have any public comment there? Hearing none, we'll adjourn this meeting until Friday, March the 20th, 2020. Thanks, everybody, for coming.